Start off. So we'll just give it another minute. Okay, we have some people just trickling in, but I think we are good to get started. So for today's masterclass, I am going to be going through the AP Bio curriculum and sort of what you can expect on the AP exam, ways that you can study and help prepare for it. And then I'll briefly go over, our program and sort of what we have to offer. So I'm going to start off by kind of telling you about what we consider to be, the pillars of AP biology, the three things that are really important to keep in mind before you move forward. I'm then going to outline what to expect on the AP exam, and I'm going to share with you guys, a couple of my tips for your student to, keep good notes and, get everything ready for the AP exam because it is a lot of content. So we're going to go through that, and then I'll go through the types of questions that you should expect just so you can be prepared. And then if we have time, we'll go through, a couple practice questions just so you can see what to expect. And these are going to be past AP exam questions. So they're directly from past exams. So that'll give you sort of the best idea of the type of questions that you should expect to get, especially application based. And then we're finally going to end off with a little bit about our program and what we have to offer, and then we can leave the floor for any questions that anybody might have regarding the program or just regarding AP biology in general. Okay, so I am going to just go ahead and get started and talk about our three-pillar approach, which is how we tackle the AP biology curriculum. Because as you probably know, or as your student has told you, there is a lot of content for AP biology. It's a very, very dense course with tons of content, and that usually, stresses students out because, they think that they have to memorize all of it. So in reality, I'm going to teach you, some study tips, but you don't have to memorize all of it. It's more so about understanding. So I will be showing you guys, what my main sort of foundational pillars are, and then how to use them. So what we consider to be our first pillar is foundation. Now, this is foundational knowledge of all of the key concepts. Now, as you've probably been able to tell, as you go through the biology curriculum, all of the concepts build onto one another. So if you don't have good foundational knowledge of the key concepts in Unit 1 and Unit 2, you're going to struggle as you go forward. So you want to make sure that you have, all of Unit 1, Unit 2, and Unit 3 very well understood. Right? Because Unit 1 is going to go through, the chemical processes. And then when you get to Unit 3 and they start talking about how they use the chemical processes, it's going to be very difficult if you haven't, established that good foundation. And a lot of the times we're going to see for the AP exam, they're going to be larger, more foundational questions. They typically will not ask you something very, very specific. The only time would maybe be in a one-off multiple choice, but for the application-based questions and for the long answer questions, they're typically very general and they want to see your foundational knowledge of the concepts. Also going to be the ability to connect different concepts, which is something that students don't really practice, because you have your individual unit tests. And then when you get to the AP exam, you're going to see that the questions are going to involve, a bunch of different units. So foundational knowledge is going to be really important for this, the ability to connect all the units together. So when I'm teaching, I always like to, say, well, we saw this in Unit 3, for example. Okay. So if you're doing, protein study, then you can go back to Unit 1 where you learn about, the structure of proteins. In Unit 6, for example, you look at the role of certain proteins in DNA replication, for example. They can ask you, what the enzyme does, and then they'll ask you for part B, what is the underlying, chemical structure of it. So you should be able to connect things. So a big struggle that I see with a lot of students is they will kind of just keep going forward with the curriculum, even if they're initially struggling. So I get it is a lot of content, and some students will just try and push through it, which isn't always the best approach because that foundational knowledge is very, very important. You're going to sort of dig yourself into a bigger hole if you kind of, you're like, okay, I don't really understand unit 1, 2, and 3. I'm just going to keep going with unit 4 and 5. That's when you're going to run into issues because you won't have that really deep understanding of the concepts because you're missing that foundational knowledge. And the big thing with application-based questions is that that's what they're testing. They're testing the basics, they're testing foundational knowledge. And if you're missing that and you're missing that really deep understanding of the concepts, that's where you're going to begin to struggle. Okay. So foundation is our number one pillar. You want to make sure that you understand the basics, the foundation, chemical bonds, chemical structure, the anatomy of the cell, and then you can go from there to into your more specific processes. Okay. So our next pillar is going to be the right type of support. Now, support for students in this case are going to be very, very important because this style of class and this amount of content students in high school are not particularly used to. This level of biology and this amount of content is very similar to what they are going to expect if they take, general first-year biology in university. So AP biology is notoriously hard because you're testing skills that the students have not yet practiced. This is kind of the course where they build up these skills. So the ability to, connect concepts, to, build foundational knowledge, the ability to apply what they're learning to different scenarios, to real life scenarios, to take really concise notes, to digest a lot of information into something that is manageable. These are skills that, students have not built up in elementary school, and they'll begin to build up in, this course, but it is something that students tend to struggle with. So you do need the right type of support and the right type of guidance. The other thing is that the AP curriculum is very, very specific. So a lot of the times, if you notice, if you're going on, Quizlet or you're looking at, quizzes online, those are typically going to be for honors, and they are good to help with preparation in terms of, memorizing your key terms. So certain flashcards like those are fine for just getting the terms down, but they're not going to help you with what's ultimately going to be on your test or your AP exam, which is going to be the application-based questions. It's very difficult to find good application-based questions with answers online. So this is something that we provide a lot to our students to get them prepped for the AP exam. Because a big issue is students who will make flashcards, they'll memorize all their terms, they'll spend all this time memorizing, all the definitions, and then you get to a question and it doesn't ask you what the enzyme does. It puts the enzyme in a situation where you have to use your foundational knowledge to apply it. Okay, so that's typically where students struggle. And so I myself have done AP biology. So I do understand, the depth of the course and how everything works. The guidelines are very specific as well. So I do have a good understanding of what's typically asked in terms of questions, as well as, what the important big concepts are. Okay. Like I can give you, a rough estimate of the big concepts that are going to be on your FRQ questions, because for each unit, there's, one big unifying concept. They're never going to give you an FRQ question about, a very specific, enzyme that you learn about in one unit. So having guidance in terms of, what you should be studying and what is important to know because there is so much content is going to be really important for the exam. Now, the last pillar that I'm going to talk about is going to be practice. Now, this is very, very important for students. Any sort of practice in terms of multiple choice, FRQ questions are going to be really good for the AP Bio exam. Now, a lot of the times students will, look at their notes and, they'll understand it, or I'll have a lecture with them and they'll say, yeah, I understand it. And then when we go to do practice questions, the concepts are not really connecting and they cannot answer, those practice questions. So practice questions are going to be really good to figure out, where that gap is, what you're struggling with. And then as well, it also helps with memorization. So it doesn't seem like it might help with memorization, but if you do enough practice questions, you're going to, get to the exam and say, oh, I remember a question that was asking this. And ultimately, kind of subconsciously helps with your memorization, the more practice questions that you do. So this is going to be important, and I'll show you guys the different types of questions that you should expect for the AP exam. But all different ranges of questions are good, especially application-based questions. They are hard to find. However, you can do the past ones from the AP exam, which I'll show you guys, and just even in your notes using application-based concepts in terms of, connecting different units, thinking about what would happen if you were to run an experiment to analyze a certain system. Things like that are going to be really important. Again, students typically, like I said, in the right type of support section, they typically will just find very simple Quizlets, or they'll make flashcards about terms. But it's very, very rare that the AP exam will, ask you what's the definition of this. That's not really the point of AP biology. The whole point is the ability to apply that knowledge. So yes, you need to know the background and, what these definitions are, but you also need to spend the time understanding, the bigger picture and how everything is intertwined and how it works. Okay, so practice is going to be very, very important. Multiple choice questions, FRQ application-based questions, and then I'm going to go through a couple tips for studying, which is going to be helpful being able to get your notes ready and to get you prepared for the AP exam. Okay, so this is our 3 pillars. We started off with foundation, right type of support, and then we did practice. Okay. So before I get into my study tips, I'm just going to give you a little brief background about myself. So my name is Emily, and I'm currently the AP Biology tutor, and I'm running the AP Biology Grade Boost program. I graduated with my Bachelor's of Biotechnology from Queen's University in Canada. I'm currently in Baltimore right now doing my Master's of Biotechnology at Johns Hopkins. I have lots of teaching experience. I've actually been running this program for about 2 years now. I have actually completed AP biology myself. So it's good because I do understand the struggle. I struggled with it when I went through it. I did very well in the course, but even then I know it's a lot of content, and it's just a different way to wire your brain. Okay. I've done a lot of research in terms of internships. So personally, the genetics unit is my favorite, but I really like teaching this AP biology course. And, there are a lot of materials that are sort of missing for students. I talk to students all the time, and they, tell me that they don't know the outline for the AP exam. It's very hard to study for something if you don't know what to expect. So this is going to take you through, what you should expect. Therefore, you can, get yourself prepared as early as possible. Okay, so I'm going to go through my kind of top study tips that you should keep in mind. These are going to be pretty general for how you should start tackling, all this material and get yourself prepped for the AP exam, which is going to be in mid-May. So my first one that I always recommend is to do a little bit of review every day. Now, this is usually pretty hard for students because of, sometimes you're going to have, a lot of things going on. You're going to want to cram or procrastinate. What I've learned is that's not the best approach for biology. For some subjects it is, but for biology, because it's so much content, you need to give your brain enough time to, learn all the concepts as you go. If you're trying to, spend 4 hours just cramming it all into your brain before a test, it's not going to stick, and it's also not going to help with your understanding. So doing about 30 minutes per day is usually what I recommend. This, stops you from doing the big cram session and trying to, memorize everything before the test. If you review a little bit every day, so what I usually say with my students is, you have your biology class, you go through, 20 lecture slides, spend about 30 minutes that day, rereading them, making notes, making sure you understand everything, maybe doing a couple practice questions on that lecture material. And then as you go, it's going to really deepen your understanding, especially in terms of foundational knowledge. So again, some students will, wait and not study, and then, they'll dedicate 5 hours, the night before their test. That is not going to help with foundational knowledge, because if you aren't understanding the foundations in there, you're going to struggle with the harder concepts. So if you can, 2 weeks before that test, establish that foundational knowledge, get it really ingrained in your brain, I guarantee you it will be a lot easier to do those application-based questions. So This is about 30 minutes every day. And then I usually say, obviously, before a test or something like that, the night before, spend a little bit more time than 30 minutes, maybe around like an hour or two, just to do practice questions and get yourself prepped. But this approach, although it's difficult for most students to stick to, is going to be the best way to get all that information in your brain, as well as help with a full, deep understanding of the concepts. Okay. So what I usually recommend is just go through the lecture notes that you went through that day. Make sure you understand it. Write down any questions that you might have or anything that you don't understand. Because, if you don't understand lesson one and, you start doing it the day before your test, there's not a lot of opportunity for you to be able to figure it out or to ask questions about that. So being as prepared as possible. Students think that they have to spend a lot of time for biology, but it's more so if you take this approach, you're also able to do it a lot more efficiently. Okay, so this is the study plan that I recommend. Now, the second tip for this is in terms of notes. Now, there is a ton of content for you to understand and for you to also memorize. If you look at the AP textbook, there is, a whole wall of text, and it does get overwhelming. So the key here, and it's something that, students need to build up the ability to do, is keep very concise and organized notes. And I totally understand why this is difficult for students, because you haven't had courses yet where there's a large amount of content that you have to condense. So a lot of students, tell me, well, I just highlight everything, I write down everything. And I'm telling you that you do not have to do that, especially for the AP exam. It's going to waste a lot of your time. And so keeping the most concise, organized notes as possible is going to be best for your study process. Now, I have a couple, key tips in terms of how to keep concise and organized notes. These are from, me personally and what I like to use and what I've seen, help our students that are in our program out. So something that I like to do is highlight key terms and definitions, right? So whenever there is a new term or a new definition, either I highlight it or I bold it. So if you're doing handwritten notes, you can take a highlighter and just highlight over that term. That ensures that that's a term that you have to memorize, right? So any sort of new enzyme that's in the process, you would highlight that, and then just make sure that, when you look through your notes, you understand what things you need to memorize. And as well, if you're just quickly scanning before a test or something, if all of those, come to mind and you know exactly what all those key terms are, you're pretty set before your test. And it also allows you to, focus on, the important bits as well. Again, I'm personally a visual learner and I love diagrams and things like that. That's what really helps me. It might not work for every student, but if you're a visual learner, diagrams and visuals are going to be really great for your notes. So you can just go on Google Images and you can type in whatever you're looking at and you can find good diagrams for those. And it's going to really aid in your understanding, because a lot of the time, they're abstract concepts that students, have never heard or never really understood. But if you can see a diagram about it, it's going to kind of also help you with your memorization. So, I personally, when I think of certain processes, I think of a specific diagram in my head, and that allows me to, break it down. That might not work for everybody, but especially like we're doing Unit 6 right now. Unit 6 is DNA replication, transcription, and translation. This is happening on such a small molecular level that, it's basically impossible to visualize in your head without a diagram. And a lot of the time, diagrams are going to basically piece everything together into one, complete image that'll help you also with memorization. So I always recommend, and all of my PowerPoints that I teach off of are very visual and have lots of diagrams, because that's also going to help with memorization. The next one is going to be to organize them in a logical order and making sure not to duplicate concepts. Okay, so this is to keep very concise and organized notes. So you want to do it in a very logical order. What I would recommend is look at the order that they do it in the textbook. So even if you're using, lecture slides from your teacher, or you're using the textbook, or, you're looking at other sources, look at the textbook and the way that it's broken down and the order in which you should learn it in. That's going to make the most sense, and it's going to keep it sort of a good flow in your brain. So usually when I think of these units, I think of the flow of how the unit is organized, and that also helps me with remembering. So for example, Unit 3, which is, our metabolism unit, I remember that we go through, the basics of what the reaction is. We go through the structure of where it's happening. We go through, each of the sections. So I remember what, glycolysis, so on from there. And then we do look at alternative modes of respiration. Okay. So that's like the most logical way to do it. That's the way it's organized. There's no point in learning, the alternative forms of photosynthesis before you learn photosynthesis. It's only going to make sense if you learn it after photosynthesis, for example. So look at your textbook, or you can even just look at the subsections of how it's organized, because it's organized that way because it's a logical flow of how it's done. A lot of the times, again, they build off of each other. So you don't want to write your notes out of order, because then it's just going to get all jumbled in your brain. It will be a lot easier to memorize if you have studied it in like the logical order. Same thing with duplicate concepts. So if you have, on page 2 of your study notes, something about glycolysis, and then on page 5 of your study notes, you have, the other half of glycolysis, the ideas are not going to connect, and it's obviously not going to be in a very logical way. That's going to make memorization as well as understanding and putting the parts together very, very difficult. The next one is connect concepts between units. So that's because on our AP exam, we're going to have lots of questions that are going to be built throughout the units, okay? And that is really going to test application, because typically students don't practice that. You have your unit 3 test, you only, memorize the material for unit 3. But then on your exam, you're going to notice, it's asking you a question from unit 5, and then it's asking you to use evidence from unit 3. So always sort of keeping that in mind as you go. You can write little side notes when you are doing concepts that you maybe heard about or that you can see interconnected with other units. Is good to do that. It's a little bit harder for when you're keeping your notes, but it's just something that you should keep in mind as you're writing them. My other one is don't use too many sources for notes. So I have a lot of students that, they get overwhelmed and they don't understand the concept. So they'll look at a bunch of different websites, a bunch of different textbooks, they'll do videos and all that. That makes your notes very hard to organize. So if you are using a lot of sources, try and keep it, again, in that logical order and that flow, because that's the way your brain is going to memorize it as well. Okay, so I wouldn't suggest, looking at all these different websites, trying to piece all of it together. If you do that, you have to then rewrite your notes so that it goes in a good order. So I usually will say, stick to certain sources. So your textbook, the lecture sites that your teacher uses, things like that. You just don't want to pick random parts from other websites. It's also going to not ensure that you're learning everything correctly. So there's going to be, certain examples that they use on maybe Khan Academy that you don't need to know for the AP exam. So you're just wasting time writing it down and memorizing it if it's not going to be anything that you could be quizzed on. Now, the other one that I will recommend is making tables and Venn diagrams to summarize concepts. So, for example, in Unit 1 or Unit 2. Unit 2, you learn about prokaryotes and you learn about eukaryotes. What I like to do after that is, write out a chart that compares and contrasts, the differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. That's a really common question. They love to ask, comparing and contrasting questions, what's similar between these two concepts, what's different. So if you can kind of summarize that at the end into a nice, table or maybe a Venn diagram, that's going to really help with digesting those concepts as well. Okay, so your textbook is not going to give this to you, but it'll help your understanding if you make it yourself. Okay. So my next study tip is going to be to start practicing application questions as soon as you can. Now, they will be difficult, and I don't want students to get discouraged because that's the point of them. Application questions are the hardest ones. But if you only spend, the last 2 weeks trying to figure out how to do them, you're not going to be building the skills to actually do the application problems. So what we do in our program is, after every unit, we look at application questions for that unit, right? And so what that does is it allows you to start working on the strategies to tackle application questions, getting you used to, the wording that they use, the way that they're going to lay them out. Because it's something that takes a lot of time to practice and to understand. So the sooner that you start doing it, and again, you don't have to do these, every day, but it will take time to build up those strategies and to build up those skills. So I would suggest getting started on applications questions as soon as possible. I always tell my students, don't get discouraged. These are very, very difficult questions, but it's really so that we can introduce you to the way that they ask the questions on the AP exam. Okay, and again, I'll show you some examples of them, but you can find a lot of these on College Board. Even if you just want to, look at them and see that the way that they're broken down, that's going to be really helpful. Also in terms of how you're going to study as well. Now, my last study tip is going to be to focus less on memorization and more on the big concepts. Now, there is so much content and they can only ask so much on the AP exam. They will rarely ask you something very small and very specific. What they do want to know is, more so big concepts, okay? So for this, don't spend, all your time, memorizing every single enzyme. More so, learn about what the process is doing. For your unit tests, it's more likely that they'll ask you something specific. But I'm saying for the AP exam specifically, they do not ask super specific questions. They're more so looking at big concepts and how you're able to apply them. Okay, so I don't typically, say you have to memorize all of this. If you understand it, that means you're able to, put it out on paper. Obviously, there's a couple, key terms that you have to memorize, but it's more so focusing on the big concepts. My example for this and what I always like to say is a lot of students struggle with cellular respiration and photosynthesis, especially, there's so many different reagents and everything that's coming in, byproducts and intermediate steps for all of your cycles, and there's just a lot of information. If you look at a diagram in your textbook of the Calvin cycle, for example, it is very overwhelming. What I tell my students is they will never ask you to draw any of the intermediates. They will never ask you to name any of the intermediates that are drawn there. Never in my entire undergrad university have I ever had to draw any of the intermediates of the Krebs cycle or the Calvin cycle. The main thing that they ask in terms of those questions is what are the inputs and what are the outputs. They want to know what's coming into the cycle and what's coming out. They don't care that it started off as a 6 carbon, then it broke down into 2, 3 carbons, and then added a phosphate. Those you don't have to memorize. What I usually say is remember what's coming in, what's coming out, and the overall purpose of the cycle. So that helps a lot with cutting down the memorization. If students know, they're never going to ask you what the third intermediate of the Krebs cycle is, but they do want to know, how many ATP are used, for example. So focusing on the right things is going to be key for, efficient studying, as well as getting a good mark on that AP exam. Now, those are it for my study notes, or in terms of my study tips, just overall concepts that I would recommend for students to keep in mind. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit of more specifics about what to expect on the AP exam. All this is available on College Board. I've summarized it pretty nicely, but it is good to obviously keep in mind what you should expect for the AP exam. A lot of students go in blind. They see their first FRQ question, on the AP exam, and then it's just, they instantly start freaking out because they are very overwhelming questions. I will not lie, they're usually very long questions. I'll show you examples of them. But if you have been, preparing for a while for, the application questions that you should expect, you can go in a lot calmer. You can think more clearly when you're doing them. So the AP biology exam is notoriously hard, and I know everybody's goal is to get a 5 on it. Now, this is looking at the grade distribution of what students typically get on the AP exam. Now, there's only about 12% of students that end up getting a 5, and most students are getting 2, 3s, and 4s. So there is a big gap between getting a 4 and getting a 5. Now, we're going to talk about, why it's so difficult, but a lot of the times students are not prepping enough, and they are, kind of cramming, at the very last bit, or, they're just kind of getting through each unit and then, doing, 1 week of cramming before the AP exam, rather than thoroughly learning the concepts as you go. Because if you're thoroughly understanding each unit as you go, the review process is very easy. So for our students, I make sure that, all of it is learned very in depth. We've done application questions. We've done multiple choice questions. So, the last little bit before the exam is just really refreshing, making sure everything is, all organized and that they know everything, and then practicing, extra questions. You should not be learning anything new before the AP exam, right? Or you shouldn't, be like refining any concept. You should already know those concepts, and it's just more of a refresh or a summary. So a lot of students do struggle with the AP exam, especially with those application questions, which I'm going to show you. But it will be really beneficial if you do application questions, obviously, before you get to the AP exam, because a lot of the time students will just kind of begin to freak out, and then it doesn't help with the whole thinking process in general. I will show you how to break them down, and surprisingly, the application questions are much easier than most students think they are. You just have to be able to understand the question and break it down. That's just going to come with time, and that's just going to come with practice. Okay? So now I'm going to go through, the overall overview of what to expect on the AP Bio exam. Now I'm going to go through 3 types of questions that I typically see on the AP Bio exam, which are going to be conceptual questions, experimental application questions, and then long answer written questions. So those are the 3 types that I say, you should probably prep for, or what you should expect. And then in terms of the actual layout of the exam, it is in 2 parts. So each one of them is going to be an hour and a half. The first part is going to be multiple choice. So you're going to get 60 multiple choice questions and you have 90 minutes to do it. It's worth half the exam. So that's part A. Now, the multiple choice questions, students typically think that they don't need to, be that worried about it, but they will throw in application-based multiple choice questions. And I'll show you an example of them. So don't think that, the multiple choice questions are just going to be, what does this mean? What does this mean? A lot of the times they will still give you application-based ones. It'll just be in, a multiple choice form. As well, something that they tend to do on the AP exam is they'll give you, one figure. So they'll give you a graph, for example, and then they'll have like 4 multiple choice questions, all referring to that same graph. Typically, the multiple choice questions are where you're going to find, the most specific questions. But again, they're never going to ask you anything super, super specific because they're more so looking at the big picture. I will say certain things that are used in the textbook, like if you're learning about, like for example, if you're doing genetics and you're doing Punnett squares right now, they'll give you examples of certain diseases, but they'll never ask you about those diseases. They're just used to supplement your learning and to further your understanding of it. But there's no use, understanding or no use memorizing all of those different diseases that are possible because they're never going to ask you anything that specific. Certain things like that, or the examples that you learn about, are really just to further your knowledge rather than something that you need to memorize. So that's the first 90 minutes. This is all done in one day. First 90 minutes, you usually get a little bit of a break in between, and then you hop into the free response, which is going to be also 90 minutes and the other half of the mark. There's going to be 6 questions total. I'll show you the breakdown of the free response questions, but these are going to be the application-based questions. This is where you should expect to see graphs, where you should draw them, where you should analyze them. And this, I will say, is where students typically struggle the most. So this is what I tend to prep students for, and this is what's going to separate you from, a 3 to a 4 to a 5, is getting yourself ready for the free response questions, because students will see, oh, it's only 6 questions, but it's 50% of the exam, right? You have to prepare for it as much as you're preparing for the multiple choice questions. So this is the overall, structure of the AP exam. Now a little bit more specifics in terms of the actual sections. So I already really talked about the multiple choice questions. So sometimes there'll be individual questions. Sometimes you'll get sets of questions where they'll give you, a diagram, and they'll ask you 4 separate questions. They'll give you a scenario and they'll ask you 4 separate questions about it, each worth 1 mark. Now for the free response questions, there are 2 long answer questions and 4 short answer questions. Typically, they will be addressing different units. So, you'll have one that addresses, genetics. You'll have one that addresses evolution. That's always the case. These are the big, big concepts. So evolution, you're going to have one for, molecular genetics. You might get one about inheritance. What are the other ones? You're going to get one about metabolism. So those are the general themes that you should expect. And then the long answer questions are worth usually about 8 to 10 marks, and they are going to be multi-part. So it'll never be, explain this process for 8 marks. They're usually, A to D, each one is 2 marks, for example. So if you aren't understanding, one of the questions, you still are able to do the rest of them. So students, again, get overwhelmed by seeing that it's 8 to 10 marks, but that's usually split into, 5 different subsections, but it's all kind of referring to the same, experiment or the same process, for example. The short answer questions are going to be 4 points each. So they're going to tackle maybe a little bit of smaller concepts and ask you pretty straightforward questions for those. And the long answer questions, students are expected to interpret and evaluate experimental results, and then also be able to do graphing and things like that. So students typically do not cover this in their curriculum, which is a major flaw in that system because they want to know how you can apply this knowledge. So a lot of the times, and I'll show you examples of them. They will show you, a graph and they'll say, you need to analyze this graph and what does this mean in terms of, the metabolism of the cell or something like that. Or they'll say, you have this cell and you put it in this condition and these were the results. So a lot of the students, especially if your class does not do a lot of labs, are really underprepared for these. So understanding how to analyze graphs is going to be very important for the application questions. They might not explicitly go over with you, but that's something, again, why you have to start these application questions earlier, is that some sort of skill that you have to build up as you go. So analyzing graphs, being able to look at, a bar graph and tell me information about it, to draw your own graph is going to be important. Understanding experimental design is a really big one. So, what's a negative control? What's a positive control? You should be able to set up your own experiment and understand, what conditions are going to make it increase and what conditions are going to make it decrease. So those are very typical questions because those are application-based questions. And I'll show you examples of them, but you need to be really good with understanding experimental parameters, how to set up your own experiment, and how to analyze the results from that. Same thing with the short answer questions, conceptual analysis, looking at models, data analysis. A lot of the times they'll give you, really big diagrams that they'll ask you to analyze. So prepping for those as soon as possible is going to be good to build those skills. Now, in terms of the unit breakdown, some students will do it by chapter, but College Board separates it by unit. And so this is the general breakdown. You have 8 units total. So most students are around unit 5 right now. And then this is the general breakdown. All of them are particularly, it's pretty evenly distributed. There's other subjects like chem where some units are really stressed and some of them are less stressed. Biology, it's a pretty even breakdown. So you can see that this is the breakdown here, and usually this helps to determine, what you should focus more time on. But again, they're all pretty much even. Chemistry of life and heredity are going to be, the smallest ones, but it's very likely that you can have extra questions on that. The big FRQ style questions are typically cellular energetics, so some sort of photosynthesis, metabolism. Cell communication is going to be a big one, less so cell cycle, so mitosis. There's not really much you can ask about mitosis, but like signal transduction is a big one as well. Ecology, and then gene expression and regulation. Heredity is not going to be one that's too much as an FRQ question, at least a long one. So those are the big sort of concepts. Okay, so what I'm going to go through now is the types of questions that you should expect to see. So I mentioned them here, and I'm going to show you examples so that you can kind of understand what these questions look like. So first, I'm going to start off with conceptual questions. So those are going to be memorizations of key terms and just basic fundamental concepts. There's no tricks involved in these. There's no application. They just want to know that, you understand this concept and you know what this enzyme does, for example. You know what this organelle in the cell does. So these are going to be very, very straightforward. They're just going to test that you have studied all the material and that you know your foundational knowledge, okay? They're not going to ask you anything crazy like in this disease, this happens, because those aren't going to be, like, the examples are not the important parts. So things like cell structure, different organelles, just basic straightforward questions are typically on the multiple choice, okay? And they're not going to be on the long answer. Some of the multiple choice ones are going to be pretty memorization based. So these are 2 examples of them. So I've seen these on the past AP exams. So this first one says, which metabolic pathway is common to both fermentation and cellular respiration of a glucose molecule? Very straightforward question. There's no, lab results. There's nothing you have to analyze here. It's asking you something very straightforward. As long as you've studied and you've covered all the material, you should be totally fine to answer this question. Another one, for example, is, blank are extremely important to plant cells for regulation of water and water pressure. Again, a very, very straightforward question. It's really just asking you for the definition of this one. So these ones typically students don't struggle with, but it does show you that, you do still need to have some sort of concept of, memorizing the important terms. Not all the terms, but the really important ones. So obviously understanding the different parts of cellular respiration is big. And then this is just asking you about the different organelles. Okay, so that's conceptual questions. Now for experimental application questions, these are going to involve obviously experimental results. So for these ones, they tend to give long background details outlining an experiment, and they typically ask you to analyze the data. Now they will lay out, a really long experiment, for example, and they'll include lots of detail that's not going to be key for understanding the question, okay? So I saw one that was looking at plant growth, and they say, soil conditions are the same, the intensity of the light is the same, the amount of water they get is the same. That wasn't important to the question, but that just allows them as markers to make sure that there's no basically errors in the question or anything that could be challenged, right? So they set up the entire experiment and they'll outline it all to you so that there's no, questions that are up in the air. But typically, you'll see this long explanation. Not all of that is important for the question. It's more so to set the stage and to make sure that everything is covered, okay? So if the only thing that they're changing in the experiment is light intensity, they will tell you that, the wavelength of light is always kept the same, which might confuse you, but that's just basically saying that that's something that they're controlling, so that, light intensity is the only thing that's changing. So students, again, tend to get overwhelmed. And then sometimes for experimental types of questions, they will give you, and I'll show you in this next one, they'll give you organisms or they'll give you enzymes that you've never heard of, and students will automatically freak out. But usually they're asking something general about enzymes rather than asking, specifically about that enzyme. It's just being able to kind of get through all of that fluff and get to the actual root of the question. So we're going to go through this question right here. And this is something that you can expect. This is a multiple choice question. So we aren't yet on to like the long answer written FRQ style questions. So if we zoom this in here, this one is not too long, but it does set the stage in terms of the type of experiments. Okay, so it says that a scientist grew chlorella, a single-celled photosynthetic algae, for 3 weeks in a laboratory culture. The culture medium contained dissolved carbon dioxide and other nutrients. At the beginning of the 3-week period, the scientists measured the rate of synthesis of certain biological molecules. The results are shown in the following graph. So this is a very typical application-based multiple choice question. It's going to give experimental data, it's setting up an experiment for you, and it's asking you to basically analyze these results. But in the root of the question, we're going to see that it doesn't really matter what the experiment is. It's really just asking you something very simple, which in this case is going to be the structure of your macromolecules, which you should 100% know, going into the exam. That's one of the main concepts for Unit 1. You learn about the 4 different macromolecules. In reality, this is really just asking you, what are the components of all 4 macromolecules? They're putting it in an experiment-based question, which shows application, but you need to be able to, kind of get to the root of the problem. So for example, students will see chlorella here, and they'll say, I don't remember anything about chlorella. I didn't study anything about chlorella. Chlorella is not in the curriculum. They're just using this as an example organism. So students will, just guess this right off the bat because they're going to say, well, I don't know anything about what a chlorella is. And honestly, I don't know what a chlorella is either. And it's not important for the context of this experiment. They're just telling you what the organism is. And sometimes they'll purposely put confusing ones to kind of trip up students. But again, they're never asking you anything specifically about chlorella. It's just the organism that they're using for the experiment. So then they'll tell you, that it's for 3 weeks in a laboratory and your culture is contained dissolved carbon dioxide and other nutrients. That means you're just giving them everything that they need to survive. Okay, so for this question here, you had to be able to analyze a graph. So looking at legends, your number one thing I will always say, if you have a graph, look at the X and the Y axis because it'll tell you what they're measuring. A lot of the time students will be like, I don't understand what's measured. And then it explicitly tells you in the X or the Y axis. Units, if you have a good understanding of units, that's also going to be helpful. So if something's, per minute, that's going to be, rate, or, per liter is looking at concentration, for example. So in this question, it has, the biological molecules at the bottom, and you should know all four of these biological molecules. So proteins, nucleic acid, lipids, and carbohydrates, explicitly mentioned in Unit 1. And then it's showing you how much is synthesized per macromolecule. So typically another thing that I like to do, I'm not super sure if you're allowed to bring highlighters, but if you are, bring a highlighter, or you can just underline it in pencil. Usually they're going to be really long questions. So sometimes it's just good to highlight the important parts so that you're not, constantly rereading the question, especially if it's a big wall of text for an FRQ question, because that's just going to waste time and you're on a time crunch for these. So for this one, I would usually say the beginning of the 3-week period is going to be important, and then rate of synthesis, because that's what you're actually analyzing. You're analyzing how much is being made. So then it gives you the results. You look at the key here. It shows you that the light gray is the beginning and the dark gray is the end. So this is just a basic bar graph, and you should be able to analyze it, within the context of, there's a beginning and there's an end, and there are 3 weeks. The 3 weeks doesn't matter. It's just saying that it's a significant amount of time in between them to clear up any confusion. So really for this one, what you had to look at, what proteins stayed exactly the same, carbohydrates stayed exactly the same. The only one that changed was nucleic acids and lipids, right? There was a decrease in how much nucleic acids were made and how much lipids were added. So if you are confused, the next thing that I would probably say is to look through the options for the multiple choice questions, because that's going to steer you in the right direction. So if you're really overwhelmed with this, you can see that the questions really just asking you what's, in the medium, what is lacking in the medium, and what is insufficient amounts in the medium. So that tells you, okay, now I'm thinking about what are the actual elements in each of these molecules. So if we're losing nucleic acids and we're losing lipids, you got to think, what do nucleic acids and lipids have in common that could be missing? And then for proteins and carbohydrates, they must have all of the material that they need. So you think about your elements. And so for this one, you also can look at the fact that it's mostly looking at different variations of nitrogen and phosphate. So that gives you even more of a hint of what you're actually specifically looking at. So nucleic acids have phosphate, lipids have phosphate, carbohydrates do not have phosphate, proteins do not have phosphate, carbohydrates, proteins will have nitrogen, things like that. And then you can easily answer this question. So I think for this one is B, I'm pretty sure, because the only ones that are decreasing are the ones that are with phosphate. So clearly the medium is lacking phosphate. So the medium is lacking phosphate, but it has enough nitrogen because you're able to keep the nitrogen content up and you're still able to produce proteins. So this is one that students really struggle with. I haven't had many students get this right when I initially do it, but you just have to be able to break down and analyze it. Now, the last type are probably the hardest ones, which are your long answer written questions. So they're typically multi-part questions that incorporate multiple units, like I said. Okay, so for this, there's going to be, a graph or an experiment, and then you have, part A is asking you a general question, then they get a little bit more specific and they include different units. So it's really important for these to understand the marking scheme and what question is being asked to get the maximum amount of marks. The students don't know how they should answer the question because they've never seen an AP exam marking scheme. So what we explicitly do, at least in our program, is we'll do an AP exam question and we'll talk about it, we'll answer everything, and then we'll look at the marking scheme after. That allows you to see, how specific that you have to be to get the full marks and what's important. And then for these ones, there's usually multiple ways to answer it, and then practice is going to be the best. So I'm going to include a couple of these. I won't go through them because they're going to take a while, but this is a application question for photosynthesis specifically. You're going to see lots of graphs, things like this, and it's asking you, about chlorophyll and bacteriorhodopsin. You don't know anything about bacteriorhodopsin, you don't learn about it, but in the context of this question, it's not important. It's just telling you that, bacteriorhodopsin is purple. It's all you need to know for this question. Okay, and then you can analyze the marking guides, and that tells you how specific you have to be, how in depth, how much detail that they want, and all the different options for what they expect. This is another example. So this one's actually asking you to draw your own graph, calculate rate, and then discuss certain things from the graph. This one here is using a diagram. So these are the types that you can expect to see. If you wanted to screenshot any of these and practice them, again, they're on the College Board website if you just look at past AP exam questions for FRQ ones. And then sometimes they're really long walls of text like this. Usually they'll highlight what's important. So we go through the difference between, describe, identify, predict. Sometimes it'll say list, which requires no explanation. Describing obviously requires an explanation. And this example was one where they gave you like a mock experiment. So these are the FRQ style questions. They are going to be the most difficult ones. Again, practice for these is going to be key. Okay, so those are my, proper tips and the way that you should tackle the AP exam. Now I'm going to go through a little bit about how our program, offers the help and for students to go through this through our Grade Boost program. Now, if I'm the tutor for the Grade Boost program, so if you enjoy, my teaching style and the information that we're providing you here, you can get a lot more information out of us through our Grade Boost program. So I'm just going to briefly talk about, what you can expect and what we offer here. It is a very complete program. That's goal is to get your kid a 5 on the AP exam. So it's the AP Grade Boost 5 program. That is the goal for all of our students. And, all these techniques that I've been talking about, all these study tips, going through, the answer guides and making sure to have concise notes is going to be really important for keeping, up with a 5. So what to expect with our Grade Boost program, you're going to have live classes with experts. You're going to have live classes with me. That allows you to ask questions right away. So if you don't understand a slide, it's not that you're waiting until the day before the test. You can ask me right there on the spot, just to clarify anything. So live classes are really good to get, instant feedback as well. Or if you need me to re-clarify something, that's something that I can do, just you unmuting yourself and telling me. Q&A sessions to tackle application problems. So we do a Q&A session, which is just going to be practice questions that you go through with me. So we'll go through multiple choice questions. We'll go through the application problems. We'll talk about how to tackle them, what the right answer is. And that also allows me to see, where your student is struggling in terms of different concepts and what we can, work on and improve. You get direct communication for homework help and questions. So students can reach out to me individually in a private chat if they want me to go over anything specifically, or if they have any questions in terms of not just the AP curriculum, but maybe their specific homework, or if they're doing a practice question and they're struggling and they want to know what the correct answer is, they can just reach out to me always. Practice questions for every unit. I mentioned the importance of practice questions and how hard it is to find good practice questions, on the internet from Khan Academy. Like those are not going to be proper AP exam questions. So if you keep doing those, you're not properly prepping yourself for the AP exam. So I make sure that, all the answers are correct, that they're up to the standard, that they cover the entire curriculum for AP, and that you're not doing questions that, are not part of the AP curriculum. Recorded lectures, which is going to be really important so that you can always rewatch them. The issue with some live classes is, you watch it and then you realize, at the end, oh, I remember her saying something about this. You can't go back and rewatch it. So our lectures are always going to be recorded, which helps if, you miss a class, or if you're just trying to study for your test or for the exam, you can rewatch a whole lecture. We offer mock AP exams and tests. So we have a mock AP exam ready to go. We'll also do obviously past AP exam questions. We offer tests to our students. We do practice question like notes packages that you can, submit to your tutor to get marked. And that way you can kind of gauge how you're doing on that unit. And then also individualized learning plans for all of the students. Now, this is going to be really important because we do host group classes. However, we make sure that all the students have an individualized learning plan for, what their best way to study is. Some students like practice questions more. Some students, are better with, writing out the notes, or they're more visual learners. So whatever works for you, and for biology, it's different for everybody. We will, accommodate. So what we try and do is provide, a big picture of everything. So we kind of provide everything, and then you can choose from there what will benefit you the best, so that you don't have to stick to just a very specific study plan. Okay, so in terms of how this is all going to work and making sure that we cover our 3 pillars of tackling AP Bio. So foundation will be through the live sessions, which are live lecture videos where I go through the actual content. I explain everything very thoroughly. I answer all of your questions through a PowerPoint slide, and just cover all of the material in this proper depth that you need to know for the AP exam. Again, the lessons are recorded, and then as well as providing note summaries. So I stress the importance of having clear and concise notes. That's something that we provide to students. So I have clear, concise notes for all of the units based off of the AP curriculum that's checked with College Board. So that is something, that they won't have to struggle with. They can obviously, make their own notes if that helps with studying, but we provide, already a good flow of how to understand it. In terms of support mechanics, live office hours. So our office hours are live. You can ask me a question, whatever you need. Community support, you have other students that are going to be doing practice questions and asking questions. You can, hear questions that maybe you didn't think of, or maybe that you didn't know that you didn't know. Group learning allows you to have a good environment with other people that are doing AP biology. So other students, and again, you get to hear a diverse amount of questions, and you get to hear, what other people are struggling with and things like that. It just creates a good environment because you're going to be with other students that are also, struggling and tackling AP biology. Finally, for learning by example, we're going to have video solutions for AP questions. So for example, our AP mock exam, there are full video solutions for every single question. Obviously, I wouldn't suggest for students to do it now, maybe do it a little bit closer to the AP exam date. But when you do that mock exam, you now have video solutions for every single question. Mock AP tests, like I said, we have lots of practice question sets that you can use as tests and send them to your teachers. And then Q&A sessions, which I already covered, are just going to be practice question sessions. Okay, so that's pretty much it in terms of how it works. For our website, which you guys can check out, there are a lot of resources that are available to students that are doing AP biology. So for example, in our course sessions section, you can download all the lesson slides that I use. You can download all the Q&As. You can download extra practice question sets. So it's all available to you through the program. It's really just a matter of downloading it. And then you also are going to have short videos for every topic. So for example, you can see Unit 5 here. If you have struggled with test crosses, which is 5.4, you click that and it'll give you a 14-minute video of a test cross and explaining it. This has been really helpful for our students who prefer, short form content. A lot of students that I talk to are, looking at, the Khan Academy videos and other videos because video form is what really helps them. So we provide our own short form videos that we know are, to the AP standard and, really thoroughly go through all the topics. So everything. So if you were to click the drop-down menu for Unit 1, you'd have every subsection of Unit 1 with a video and a note attached. And then there are also videos by me. So just make sure that, there's consistency in the teaching as well. Like I said, all of the recordings of the lectures are up. So, for the live classes that you're doing, the lectures are going to be recorded so that you can watch them again. And then also you'll have access. I've been teaching this class since September from, the very beginning of Unit 1, introduction into this chemistry. So you also will have access to those. It's really a matter of just going through them and, finding the ones for the specific topics that you're looking for. So again, it's individualized to students because if you like long form lecture videos, you can rewatch a lecture video. If you like short form ones, you have our short form videos as well. So it really is whatever works best for you. We will, provide everything. Now, the final thing is going to be directly chatting with your tutors. So I mentioned this as well. I have students reach out to me all the time with questions. I've had students run project questions past me, or they'll say, we don't have class today, but I was doing this practice question and I don't understand why it's A. Can you explain it to me? Or they'll say, I was, actually struggling with Punnett squares. Can you re-explain it in the next class? I'm more than happy to throw in a couple extra slides. So this just allows it to also be individualized to the student, because they can give me their feedback and they can tell me what they're struggling with. I keep up with when all the students' tests are. So you can text me saying, I have a test on Thursday on cellular respiration. Can you send me extra application questions? I will send it to you directly through that chat. Okay, so this just allows for you to get all of your needs met. As long as you ask for it, more than happy to do it. Now that's pretty much everything for our program. In terms of the student success rate for these, we've been having a lot of really good results from this, because it is an entire program. It's not just 1 hour of tutoring a week to answer any questions. You're learning the entire content, and you are doing practice questions for the entire content, as well as, all the times that I don't see you, you also have all the videos, all the practice questions. You don't have to go to other sources to try and collect all this material. All the material is, provided for you through the course. So for example, some of the students here, we had a student that was, going at around low 80s, and her first test after a couple of sessions with us for the class that I taught her ended up with a 94. We had students, going from a 77 to a 94. And so we get really good results because I teach it so thoroughly, and we go through all of the different, types of questions that you can expect. Okay. And then in terms of testimonials, you guys are welcome to watch these. I won't play them now, but these are available on our YouTube as well as our website, which I will show. So we had Shabam, for example, and he was coming into our classes with 60s and 70s, and he ended up doing our grade boost program, and he ended up getting, I believe, a 4 and a 5 on his final exams, and is actually waitlisted for Stanford right now. So we're waiting to hear back from that, which is really exciting. Shabam has been with us for a while. We have academic advisors as well that can help you out, figuring out what you want to do, that you can always have a meeting with them if, you're figuring out what universities you want to apply for, anything like that. And then Sanj and Sawar were for specifically our AP Bio class. And so I taught both of them from the very beginning of Unit 1, and they were actually able to get from a B- to an A+, which was great. One of them got 100% on the first test for the first unit that I taught them. They were the only one in their class to do so, so it was really good results for them. And you can hear from a parent's perspective as well. So the students are in this video as well as their mom. So, parents, if you are curious, you can hear parent perspective as well as student perspective. You can find that on our YouTube channel as well. Now, that's pretty much it for our masterclass. The last kind of things is just how to keep in touch with us. So I think a lot of you came from our Facebook page. I would suggest, going into our Facebook page for any additional resources. We've posted some notes there. We do AP Bio daily questions, resources. If there's more master classes, you'll get updates on those. So if you just join our Facebook group at Master Courses, that's where you're going to get probably the most recent updated information. And then finally, if you, have enjoyed what I've been talking about, and you're interested in, a consultation with us where we can talk to your students, see where their issues are, figure out a really good individualized plan, as well as if the program is going to work for them. Either way, you will be talking to, an expert that can tell you, what is working for you and what's not, maybe the gaps that you can fill in. You can book a meeting with us. So I believe it has already been posted in the chat. If you do want to book a meeting with us, you can just click that and click whatever availability works for you on the calendar. Now, what that sort of session will be is a consultation with me, as well as a couple other members of our team to figure out, the best course of action for you. Even if, you don't end up continuing, you'll at least have a good plan for continuing forward for your AP exam studying, and we can provide you with some good resources. So if you are interested in joining the program and, you liked the way I taught and everything I talked about, you could just click that link and book in a session with us. You can always message us on Facebook for any questions. And then, yeah, I think that's pretty much it for our master class. So the last thing that I'm going to just kind of put up is if anybody has any questions, you can type them in the chat. I'll stay around for the next couple minutes to see if anybody has any questions. But yeah, that is pretty much it for our masterclass. If you are interested in anything in terms of this material, the videos, the questions, join our Facebook, and then you can book in a session with us through the link that I think has already been posted in the chat. I'll stay on for the next couple minutes just in case anybody, has any questions. The course fees. So the course fees, once you sign up so the meeting is free, obviously, and then we will talk about a plan that best suits you. It really depends on, what your student needs. So if they're really struggling, we feel like they'll need, the full 3 classes. There are different plans at different price points. So we'll talk about that. We can offer 3 classes, 1 class, there's a whole different option. What I would suggest is, sitting down with our team and talking about, what they're struggling with and what your kind of goals are. And then we can offer you, our different plans, but there are different price points for different plans. What is the price do you pay for? Okay, so for that, in terms of that, what we typically say is, your best option is to do like the whole entire course, which goes from, right when you sign up until May. So that ensures that, I'm teaching your child, the units that they're doing in school right now, as well as for the last 2 months, we're going to do just strictly AP exam prep. So we do suggest, the full course, and that's something that we can break up into payments. We do offer, trial plans where you could try it out for a month. And then if you want, you can extend it past that. Okay. We usually say is, the whole course is designed to be a whole course, but you can do it per month. And then if you do want to do the whole course, it's not just one payment. You can, talk to our team. We're more than happy to split it up into several payments throughout, every month, every 2 months, something like that. How can students in grade 8 or the months prior to AP years prepare themselves or get ready for the course? So in terms of, people that are going into the course, I would typically say you don't have to study, or you don't really need to go through it. I would say roughly go through the foundations of it, because if you're going through, the basics of chemical structure, a little bit about the organization of the cells, things like that, and they should be going over like quite a bit of it in grade 8 biology. But doing that, and then also, just familiarizing yourself with the techniques of what you should do and how to go forward. And then I wouldn't suggest, really intensely studying, the specifics, but, maybe reviewing the foundational knowledge. So, 1 to 3 are probably the most important, I would say, for foundational knowledge. And then just also practicing, skills in terms of how to make concise and organized notes. I believe the test should be on paper this year. I mean, it does depend on where you are, but I don't see why it would be online. For the AP Biology Study Guide, you can go to our Facebook. I believe we posted the PDF. It has all of our notes and some extra practice questions. So if you go to our Facebook page, you can download that. It's a really good tool for students, even just to see the breakdown. Yes, so there are written notes / clip notes written for all the students. So you can check out our AP Bio Study Guide, which is what I consider to be, like kind of our textbook for the course. So it has my personal written, concise, organized notes for every single unit. After every single unit, there's, 30, 40 practice questions. So it's just like kind of a good review book for them to have. And so they have access to, the written versions, and then as well, they can download, the PowerPoint slides that I use. Okay. What is the suggested time frame to begin the course before the AP exam? So that really just depends on, what your student is struggling with. So the way that we're doing it for right now is it does depend on, what they're learning. And we have different groups that are situated at different units so that we can accommodate everybody. So we have groups at Unit 5, Unit 6, Unit 3 even. So what you can expect is that I will be teaching them the rest of the content up until, if they're on Unit 6, I'll teach them Unit 6, 7, and 8 as they go through class, because we're also trying to obviously boost their GPA grades as well as we're going. And then we're going to do exam prep probably about 2 months before the AP exam. So it depends on what kind of help you're looking for. If you just want just AP exam prep, you don't want me to like thoroughly teach the units, I would suggest, you can join for the last 2 months. But if you really want, if your student's on unit 5 and you want to make sure that they, thoroughly learn unit 5 to unit 8, because maybe they're not getting the right, like the marks that they're happy with, then I would say, join now so that I can teach them those very thoroughly. And then you'll also do exam prep. So it's really what your student is struggling with and kind of what they want to get out of it. What fields of profession that AP Bio would be helpful for? So AP Bio is really helpful for a lot of students that go into like the medical studies, and for in general for anything science related. So even if you don't want to go into biology, you want to do chemistry, sometimes for engineering, they will make you take a general first year biology class, which is the content is exactly the same as it is here. So it is good prep. Any student that goes into any sort of science program, even if it's not biology focused, will have to take general first year biology. So anything in the medical stream, I'm personally in the biotech stream. If you want to do, anything sort of in the biology realm, research, there's so many different opportunities. There's biocomputing, coding, all those types of things. But what AP Bio does really well is prep you for university in terms of writing good, concise notes and digesting a lot of material, because it's in a very similar fashion to how they do it in a university, where it's a lecture and you have to write down and concise everything. What are some good sources a student could use in their higher middle school years if the syllabus taken in school isn't broad enough? So a couple good resources in terms of that, I would definitely look at the way that it's broken down per unit, because a lot of the times they don't really prep you too much. I will say what students typically struggle with the most is that big adjustment between grade 8 and then the actual exam. So in terms of good sources, you can always check out our Facebook. And then I would just say even just downloading you can find free PDFs of the textbook, even just, you don't have to read the entire textbook, looking at the note summaries, things like that. There's always videos that are really good that you can watch, anything like that. I wouldn't say, stress them out with intensely prepping, kind of looking at, again, like I said, the foundational knowledge. So understanding probably the first 3 units on a basic level is going to make your life a lot easier when you go into the exam, and when you learn the rest of the content, you'll already be ahead and you'll already have that foundational knowledge. For everybody asking about the Facebook group, we re-added it to the chat. And again, the fees are going to depend on what you're looking for. Your best bet is to book a free consultation with us so we can talk about all the options. We have group classes, we have one-on-one classes, we have programs where you can take 1 class a week or 3 classes a week. So you're going to really have a range of prices. It depends on what you're looking for. So yeah, especially if you want to do like the just exam review, that's obviously going to cost a lot less than if you're doing, a full course. So what we really do in this meeting is, we just hear from you and your student in terms of what you want to get out of it and what they're struggling with. We'll give you, our plan that we think will work best. And then from there, we'll offer, all the different options. Good volunteering or clinical volunteering to the course. So good volunteering or clinical jobs. Let me think. So when I was in high school, at least when I was doing AP biology myself, there's always some sort of, like science club that you can get a part of and at least hear from other students, or joining, again, Facebook groups, or joining different groups where people are talking about how AP biology is. I know hospitals are always looking for volunteers. That's going to help you, prepare a little bit farther. It is quite difficult to do at least more clinical research jobs while you're in high school. But I will say, hospitals are always looking for people. And then really just talking to other people that have done AP biology, looking at resources for that. Do you offer trial classes before signing up for the program? So that's something that we can discuss in the meeting, and it really depends on what you're looking for. We offer a trial month if you're looking at the whole program and you just want to try out a month. That's something we can do. In terms of trial classes, we can send you. So we usually don't do like an entire trial program. We can do a deposit if you want to look at all of the content and review all the content. And then what we can also do is send you a video, or like we can send you one of the lecture recordings so that you can kind of see my teaching style, and then you can see, you know, the environment that they would be in, as well as we'll show you all of the content that they would have access to. So we can send you like trial classes in terms of recorded videos. And then we also usually do a month trial, which is at a reduced price than obviously the full course. When will the next masterclass be? It'll probably be next week at the same time. I'll be going through, you know, the same type of information. And then hopefully I can get into a little bit more specific into, you know, we can look at some more FRQ style questions. So I think it'll be next week at the same time. Just in case, I would just say, you know, follow our Facebook. That's when we post all the information. We'll post the links for everything. You can RSVP. So if you want to keep up to date, how to contact you to start comments for my daughter. Yeah, so to contact us, I would say you can click the link that we've posted in the chat here, which is going to be the link to book in a meeting. So if you are interested in the program, I would say click the link there, book in a meeting, and then we can chat about, you know, different types of options in terms of courses. Overall, how hard would you say the course is? Yeah, can we send the link just again for booking in the sessions? So the course is notoriously what I would like considered hard, but I will say it definitely depends on the student. I think it's manageable for every single student. It just depends on how much, you know, effort that they're going to put in and things like that. Obviously, there's going to be tips that I have, but it is a manageable course. There's tons of students that do well in AP biology. It really just depends on how willing the student is to, you know, do practice questions, to do their 30 minutes a day. The number one thing is if students are going to procrastinate, or they're going to kind of leave things to the last minute, or they're not going to ask questions, that's typically when it gets hard. And that's why students typically do not do too great. So as long as they're preparing with enough time, it'll be, you know, it is a very manageable course. Obviously, it is a lot of content, but hopefully I kind of reassured you that, you know, it isn't always all memorization. It's more so an understanding type. Our pre-AP courses for AP Bio. Yeah, so if you are looking to take AP Bio and you kind of want to get ahead, we do offer summer courses. So they're kind of slower paced summer courses to kind of ease you into it. We have students do that. So when they take, you know, AP Bio the next semester, they can, you know, they have a good, at least foundational knowledge. We want to teach you, you know, at least the foundations, cover everything that is going to be built upon. And then, so we do offer, you know, summer courses, which is a good idea. Or really, if you want to take a look at our book and even just review the type of content, or, you know, practice writing concise notes and organizing things, that is going to be really helpful. And yeah. If you do want to attend the class next week, I believe we will be posting the recording on the Facebook as well for anybody that missed it. If you don't see the recording, you can just message the Facebook and say that you need the recording. So I'll make sure that the recording gets posted next week for the Facebook. And then again, if you need it, you can just message if anything. Okay, we do record these. Hopefully I got to everybody's question. What are the best courses to do along with AP Bio if you're looking to go into the medical field? So AP Bio, you don't have to take AP Chem specifically, but chemistry, I will say if you're going anywhere in the medical stream, in the science stream, first year classes, typically you take a full biology, a full chem, a full calculus. Calculus is the big one. I know there's a couple different types of maths that you can take. Typically for the medical field, they want calculus. They don't really care about like stats or functions. Calculus is the big one. Any sort of like health class. But in terms of that, yeah, those were my three main courses that I remember taking. Some sort of computer science is always good because a lot of things in the medical field, at least now, are really tech-based. So in terms of, creating graphs, sometimes coding is going to be important for the medical field. I've taken myself a couple informatics classes. So if you want to get a head start on computer science, that's also good. There's different streams within that. So yeah, definitely biochem. Physics as well. Physics is on the, I didn't personally take physics first year because I didn't go like into the direct medical stream. I went more into the tech side. But physics as well is one of the big ones that you have to take in first year because it's on the MCAT, okay? So all of the sciences, more of a focus on bio and chem, but you will have to take physics if you're going medical track. So making sure all of those are covered. Specifically for chem, organic chemistry is a big one. You'll cover that maybe in AP Chem, but mostly in university. I know a lot of students don't know that you need organic chemistry for, taking the MCAT. So yeah, specifically organic chemistry, physics is on the MCAT, things like that. What is a typical grade to end AP Bio with that is to be good for a college? So I guess it depends on if they're going to look at your AP mark or your GPA mark. So a 4 is a very good mark. A 4 is a very good mark. I will say that. 5 is kind of like above and beyond that point. 4 should be good for, most of the universities that you're applying for. Obviously, the 5 is like ideal, but they also want to see, like consistency with your marks as well. So I would say, a 4 is something that we see with most of our students. That 5 is going to be, that separator. You can get into a lot of good universities with a 4, but that 5 is kind of like the above and beyond. And that's, most students don't really get it, but it will make you stand out if you do have a 5. What level of math should be taken concurrently with AP Bio? I'm in AP Pre-Calc. I'm thinking about going straight to AP Calc next year. Okay, so AP Calc should be more than enough. So yeah, I just know that Calc is the big one for the science courses. So with AP Bio, you don't have to take AP Calc. It'll make you extra prepared for your first year class. I mean, I took AP Calc and I found the first year calc class that, everybody in science has to take very easy. So it will get you extra prepared, but again, it's not incredibly necessary. They will teach it all to you in the calc class, but it's kind of the same thing with AP Bio. It'll like cover everything and make sure you're extra prepared for it, but not entirely necessary if you want to get into the med stream. But I will say calc is the big one. I know there's a bunch of different maths. Most people, especially depending, I would just say look at what's on the MCAT. So calc is on the MCAT, physics is on the LCAT. Is a 5 100% for the course exam? No, it is not. It's actually a lot lower than that. So because the exam is kind of notoriously difficult, you actually don't need 100% to get a 5. It changes every year depending on, what kind of marks students get. But you actually don't even need to fill out the entire exam to get a 5. Okay. I think you need to fill out about 80% of it correctly to get a 5. So it doesn't go with a specific range. It's kind of meant to be a little bit harder. And so it's not that, 97 to 100% is 5. Typically that range is a little bit bigger. It's just a little bit of a harder exam. So you don't actually need to even fill out all of the exam to get a 5. Obviously I would suggest filling out the entire exam, but yeah, don't stress that you need 100% to get a 5. It's a range, I would say, between like 80 and 100. Sample test before the AP exam? Yes, definitely. So every unit that we do, we provide practice question sets. So you'll get, a whole big set of practice questions with answers. So there's, practice tests for every unit. And then we actually have mock AP exams that I've constructed. We have mock tests that you can do. So we have like mock unit tests. We did a mock midterm. So yeah, because I stress, that, practice is really important. We do provide a lot of it. Okay. So I think that's where I'm going to end off for today. If you do have any more questions, we're going to do a masterclass next week as well. You can message us on our Facebook. I actually do have to go teach a class in a couple of minutes, so I'm going to hop off so that I can, teach my next bio class. But I hope you guys enjoyed and that we answered all of your questions. If you have any more, you can always message us. Okay. So I hope everybody enjoyed. If you're not a registered student and you want the mock exam, I would say check out our AP study guide. There's practice questions and mock tests in there. It's on our Facebook. Okay. All right. Bye, guys.